Hello everyone, this is Mike Quinsey connecting the light. My guest today is Stephen Sindoni, researcher, author and filmmaker who is researching the legend of J.C. Brown, who in 1904 is said to have found the entrance to an 11-mile tunnel leading under Mount Shasta to the lost civilization of Lemuria. I'm very excited to have this opportunity to speak to you, Stephen, because Lemuria, Atlantis and those type of things are of great interest to me. So welcome to the program.
Well, I thank you very much, Michael, for having me today. It's my pleasure to be on with you today.
That's great. How long have you been involved in this quest to date?
Well, it started in late of December of 2007. I had just finished writing a screenplay, and it was at that time I decided to spend a couple hours on the Internet to search for an interesting story that I could write about. And as fate would have it, I stumbled upon The Legend of J.C. Brown, reading a short excerpt from a book written from author Emily A. Frank entitled Mount Shasta, California's Mystic Mountain, and I instantly became fascinated by it.
Right. Do you think that you might well have been chosen to follow this path because your experiences seem to be most fortunate in the way that you eventually got to the point where you believe you might have rediscovered the cave, although it's been sealed off?
Yes. As soon as I got involved following this story, it was as though I had a sixth sense about it, as though I had first-hand knowledge and how it all happened and how it all unraveled. It's almost like a psychic detective how this all came to play, and I would love to share it with your audience today.
Yes. Well, that is my feeling. I don't think these things happen in life purely by chance, and I'm sure you're right, that there is some sort of psychic drive that keeps you going towards this goal. Now, when did you first pick up on the legend of J.C. Brown?
Well, as I said, as I began to say, in December of 2007, after reading the short excerpt, I found 5 clues on the Internet regarding the legend, the man of the legend. He claimed he was a geologist. He claimed he worked for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company his whole entire career. So there was a couple of things that I got out of the initial legend. So I decided I was going to spend a couple of weeks in the New York Public Library to research the clues and see what I would come up with the 5 clues that I had read in the short excerpt over the Internet. And once, running down the 5 clues, at first I thought that I was going to be writing a story about a maverick, a con man, someone who had come to town and spin a large yarn about Lemuria and taken a lot of money from the people that he had, sat down for 6 weeks and wanted to take on an expedition. But lo and behold, what I found out was that A, there was a Lord Cowdray Mining Company. B, there was a man who was named Lord Cowdray. There was a company that existed. And once I found these things out, I realized, wait a minute, I'm onto something here. Maybe this isn't, a man showing up in Stockton, California in 1934 and, being a crook or a thief. Maybe this man really did find the things that he stated that he did.
You actually, of course, found out that he was quite straight and honest in his dealings with the people at Stockton. You might tell us perhaps a little bit about that. I know it's looking at a later part of the story, but that would be of interest because it's a key happening, isn't it, to say the least?
Yes, well, what happened was is that J.C. Brown, as he called himself in 1934, shows up in the office of the editor of the Stockton Record and he spins a yarn and tells the editor of the paper that 30 years earlier, that while working for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company of England, that he noticed a section of the rock that didn't jibe with the formation of the real mass. And at that point, he decided to remove the rock, and he found that there was a tunnel and which curved downward, and 3 miles from the mouth of the tunnel, which was 7 feet wide and 10 feet high, he struck a cross-section containing gold-bearing ore that an ancient civilization he believed had mined. And then further on, he struck another cross-section that apparently had mined copper in it. So at this point, he's in this tunnel, and 3 miles into the tunnel, he's finding, ancient gold-bearing ore that was done by an ancient civilization. So at this point, he realized that the air in this one section was pretty bad, because he's now 3 miles deep into this tunnel, and he declined another 8 additional miles, which now had brought him 11 miles inside the mountain and approximately 2,300 feet from the surface. So he had, measurements to measure distance, because he was a geologist by trade. And what he found next was what he called the village. And this is the interesting part of the story. What he found was rooms. He found 2 rooms that were 20 feet long and wide, and they were filled with copper and gold tablets. The tablets were 3 to 4 inches in concave, and they were laid inside one another. The rooms that he found were literally full of plates inscribed neatly. He found rooms containing many weapons, and the weapons were interesting because they were, in his words, tempered copper spears, and they could be bent from the head of the weapon to the base of the shaft, and they would spring right back into place. So he marveled at the technology that he found there in these rooms. But what was interesting was that he claimed that when he said village, that there were streets were laid out like a little village there. And in one of the rooms, he found 27 skeletons, the smallest of which, Mike, was 6 feet 6 inches, and the tallest was more than 10 feet tall. So here he's got the remains of the tall ones, or an ancient civilization of height, not in modern day, America. So here he's onto something. In another room, he found an embalmed man and a woman dressed in royal robes, which he believed were king and queen of this race. So he believed he stumbled into an ancient burial chamber, and he said the room was beautiful to behold. On the walls, he found great crosses, not even of the conventional modern type, and there was a sun design worked in copper and gold, and there were streamers, and he found 13 statues in all made of copper and gold. And the technology, he believed, was an important link in ancient American history, and these people, Michael, were highly skilled craftsmen, because that's what their work indicated. And J.B. Body, or J.C. Brown, was a geologist. So here's a man who studied in England for many, many years as a geologist, and so here was a man who knew about, the technology, and he marveled at what he found here in this tunnel. And he believed that this ancient race used radium, and by the use of radium, they were able to temper the copper. So,
Yeah.
Here is an ancient race with ancient technology that he found.
Right. But not so lacking in skills or technology by the sound of it. Do you feel that after he found the caves, and he evidently visited them for a number of times, which you found records of his visits there, that he must have worked to record everything he found and perhaps did drawings of the artifacts and so forth? I mean,
Yes.
Have you found any evidence of that?
Well, that is the part of the story I'm working on. What he had claimed in the newspaper article in 1934, which I didn't have initially. I got that later on from columnist Michael Fitzgerald of the Stockton Record, but he was kind of amazed that I was able to piece this together without ever having the initial 1934 article in the paper, because it was in archives, and only after I spoke to him and told him my findings did he then ask to interview me and then share with me the initial newspaper article. But in the article, J.C. Brown, which this was the alias that J.B. Body had given them in 1934 in the newspaper when they interviewed him, claimed that in a vault in a Texas bank, he had pictures of the scene and papers. And he went on to say that his family planned to exploit the cave themselves, his wife's father, his wife, and his daughter, and an old college chum. He says a series of tragedies had struck him, and this was interesting here. The first one died, then another. One was killed in an accident, and the others died. And he himself was hurt in an accident, then losing all heart and this ambition. But he claimed he was getting back on his feet again, and if his health would hold out, he would get started. He arrived in Stockton in his late 60s, so here it is a man who claimed to have found this 30 years earlier, and now he's in Stockton in 1934, and explaining to the Stockton Record editor and other people that he wanted to enlist a corps of trained people who he, at his own expense, would fund the expedition to go up from Stockton to Mount Shasta, and he wanted them to assist him in cataloging the specimens, and he wanted to keep the relics in the cave where he found the king and queen that were embalmed. But he said that he found 2 other caves that he had located, and for the people who came up with him from Stockton to Mount Shasta, then they would get the artifacts and they would get the relics in those 2 caves that he had located. So that's what he had wanted for everyone who he had enlisted. And after his initial conversation with the Stockton Record newspaper editor, they enlisted John C. Root as the organizer, and John C. Root was a retired printer, so at his house for 6 weeks, twice a day, J.B. Body or J.C. Brown would spin the tale of the things that they would find up under Mount Shasta, and that he would let them know on a specific date when the time would be right for them all to go up on the expedition at his expense. So people had sold their possessions. They had doctors, lawyers, prominent people of the town for 6 weeks that were really keyed in on this old English gentleman's story, and they believed wholeheartedly, Michael, that everything that he said was on the level and he was telling the truth.
Yes. Right. So the mystery really for you must be what he did during those 30 years from the first discovery up to the time when he set this group up in Stockton. Now, I thought, and you seem to indicate that it is possibly true, that he must have done a lot of work recording the evidence. But do I take it from what you've just said about him that he might have been aiming to, as it were, cash in on it? Because the fact he didn't appear to have done anything for 30 years suggests that he was more interested in keeping it intact. And he had a sort of greater idea of how to use it, perhaps for the benefit of everybody else.
Well, what I learned after learning of his discovery as to who he was, I realized he was a man of integrity, a man of morals, character, and good breeding. He wanted to, bring this find to light, but what had happened was when he came up to Stockton, California, being he was a millionaire and very wealthy, he had stayed in a public shelter, because if anyone had known that he was really John Benjamin Body, they would have known that he was worth $40 million at that time, and he was afraid of being kidnapped. He had made many trips from Mexico up and through Laredo border, Texas, coming up to the Mount Shasta area to go into the tunnel that he found. So what I needed to do was, once I was able to determine that John Benjamin Body was the man, then I had to figure out, well, why would a man who left England in 1890 to work for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company and take a job in Mexico as a geologist and civil engineer, and spend 25 years in Mexico and never be a resident of the United States, what would prompt him to come from Mexico across the border at least 13 times that I tracked him with Lord Cowdray, the owner of the company, so verifying for me that they both went up there together, just as he mentioned in his legend, and with other engineers, which I'll cite. But what was interesting to me is, if he never lived in the United States, what was his attraction to Shasta? And this is where the psychic detective piece of the puzzle comes in. Because once I was able to determine that John Benjamin Body was in fact J.C. Brown, I then started to ask myself the question, okay, if it was me, how would I do it? And I realized that I looked at the train system, because he came in on a Mexican steamship through Laredo, Texas, and there was a train system that he got on, and I believe that they first came into the United States to go to the Shasta Springs Resort, which is up in Dunsmuir, California. So what I learned by the border crossings, there was 4 men, and initially that went together with J.B. Body through Laredo, Texas, and these 4 men were Lord Cowdray himself in 1904. There was W.E. Sayers and a Robert Young, and they went up there in 1904, and I believe that they stayed at the Mount Shasta Springs Resort. So I started researching this, and I ended up getting a map of the Mount Shasta Springs Resort, and what made this a key component for me was that Mount Shasta Resort was the place of the elite where they would go there. They claimed to have the best water on earth, and only the rich would go there. It had an incline railroad where once they got off the train, they'd get onto another incline railroad, which would take them up into the resort, and they would, do what the elite do, just enjoy their vacations. Because these men, by the year 1904, they were both already millionaires. J.B. Body and, of course, his owner, Lord Cowdray, when he died in 1927 in England, he was the 6th richest man in the world. So here we're talking about, the top men of the world, playing in their, paradise or playgrounds. And it was at this resort that they came across this unusual rock formation, basalt formation. And it was my hunch that they looked at each other and said, we're civil engineers. What do you think? This rock looks unusual. We need to come back to investigate it. Well, 3 years later in my research, J.B. Body came back with 3 other engineers, Fred Kleisner, John McLaughlin, and C.M. Yeomans, and it was interesting. They brought an additional man who was John Gill Martin, which was John Benjamin Body's personal valet. So after discovering this, I says, well, I believe I figured out that initially they were up there having a good time when they came across this formation. And then so I looked deeper into the border crossings, and in 1910, what I found interesting is that John Benjamin Body, on the manifest paperwork, when asked if he had ever been in the United States, Michael, now he lies and says no. So I'm looking at the manifest. I go, wait a minute. Well, this makes interesting, observation here, because, yes, the reason why he said he's never been in the United States because he found something in 1907 on there on his second trip. Then the following year in 1911, I have Lord Cowdray going back through Mexico to the United States with John Benjamin Body again. So now it's okay. Now I know I've got this, because now they both went back up there again, because John Benjamin Body wanted to show the owner of his company, Lord Cowdray, or Sir Wheaton Pearson, as his birth name was given in England, to come up there again. And they probably did a lot more research and journeying through the actual tunnels and the finds that they found. I then asked myself, well, where could the bank be? Because he mentions the bank in the legend.
Yeah.
And as I researched banks in America in that day, in Laredo, Texas, because I believed that the bank had to be in Laredo, Texas, because he was going back over the border. And going over the border, you're not sure what you can bring in and what you can't. So I determined that if it was me, I would find a bank in Laredo, Texas. And I did find a bank called the Laredo National Bank, which was founded around 1890. And it was on San Bernardino Avenue, which I believe that is where he had the vault with the papers and the artifacts. And when the time was right, he would go to the bank, get what he needed, and take it over the border. Or if the time wasn't right, he'd leave it there in the vault there and keep it there until it was safe passage to go back over into Mexico because he lived in Veracruz, Mexico, where he lived and worked while he worked for the Lloyd Cowdery Mining Company. So the fact that he had been kidnapped a number of times, as he cited in the legend itself, he had to be very careful as to, his movements and whereabouts, especially when he was in the United States. And the fact he was a prominent individual, he was, very, very, aware of that his secret could not get out. So for him, I think, Michael, in answering your question, I think for him it was more of historical value than it was for the wealth that he would acquire, because he was already very wealthy at this point.
Yes. I rather guess that would be the case. Otherwise, one cannot think of any reason why he waited so long from 1904 to 1934 before he appeared to do something about it. Now, you mentioned that his family, relatives or whatever, sort of disappeared, if I may use the word, one by one. Do you think there was some underhand business going on and that someone else, criminally or otherwise, wanted to get their hands on it?
Yes, I do. I am a firm believer in that, because as I researched this further and I came out to Mount Shasta to look for, the back door to Lemuria, I myself became a person of interest, and it was interesting. So I fully could identify with John Benjamin Body as to when he talked about mysterious things start happening. I'll give you an interesting tidbit. What I learned coming out here, that every president since Grover Cleveland has fished in the waters near Mossbury Falls or near where I found this back entrance that I believe leads underneath Mount Shasta. So there is a significance with this area. I'm not sure yet, but Obama will be out here fishing in these waters in the Sacramento River, which is right near where this discovery that I made is. So it's interesting that I find locals who have told me this about, what it is that I have unearthed and I have found. So I know that this secret is a very big one for the standpoint of, if we look at just the Bering Strait theory. If the Bering Strait theory is a lie, so to speak, then it shatters the existing paradigm for religion, and you can't control people unless you have something to control them blindly by.
Yes.
So the discovery is more than just a discovery. It eliminates the timeline, and it shows us we've been here for many, many thousands of years. And for that reason, I believe J.B. Body or J.C. Brown knew that if this discovery had come to light, it would change the belief, because they wanted, the government, American government wanted Americans to believe that the Native Americans came through a land bridge through China. They wanted them to believe that this is the interesting thing that I find laughable, that there are 6 mountain ranges, sub-degree temperatures, and unbelievable conditions that animals, plant, fauna life, wildlife would come across the Bering Straits for over 6,000 miles and make its way to North America. It just doesn't fly.
No, that would be some task even today. I don't know about thousands of years ago. Right. Now, I can't help coming back to this question of perhaps J.C. Brown or Body having been frightened off, but when he got his group ready at Stockton and then suddenly he disappeared, I have to think to myself that perhaps he was threatened that if he went ahead with it, something would happen to him, and maybe he took fright. I mean, the cave was sealed, so he knew that was safe. And you actually mentioned that you have a belief, I don't know whether it goes beyond that he might have actually came back to England and died here in 1938. Tell us about your findings or theory about that.
Well, what had happened was after he disappeared in 34, for whatever his reasons were, he probably was threatened because, as I said, the reasons I said about the Bering Strait and the Native Americans. I mean, it's over 300 reservations that still exist in the United States, and the oral tradition of the Native Americans, that they are descendants of the people who live below Mount Shasta and all the other mountains in the Cascade Mountain ranges. So if this be the case and this be true, and the oral history of the Native Americans is true, then my God, I mean, you've got to keep this under wraps, because you have to colonize them, you got to brutalize them, and you have to Christianize them to make them forget their ancient oral history. So this is a big thing that I believe that is why this is still under wraps.
Yes. So, I mean, do you firmly believe then that he had to disappear and that he did come back to England?
Well, what happened was he was working, as I said, for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company the whole time in Mexico. But in 1915, which was when he was asked to come back to work for the London office of the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. So in 1915, when Mexico took over the control of the oil fields, because they were involved with a lot of work in Mexico through the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. JB Body worked very closely with Porfirio Diaz, the president of Mexico. They had projects of the drainage of Mexico. They put up a harbor works that predated by 12 years the Panama Canal, which had a railway going from the Gulf Coast of Mexico to the Pacific coast, where goods and services could be, put on trains and distributed all over the North American continent from the Far East. So they beat the Americans, to the trade game, and as a result of them building this Trans-Isthmian Railroad, as luck would have it, JB Body struck oil, and they created the Mexican Aguilar Oil Company, which later became Dutch Petroleum Shell. And that's how he got rewarded by Lord Cowdray, because not only was he a great civil engineer, doing all the harbor works and the things he did in Mexico, but they ended up striking oil, and now they supplied, oil all over the world through Dutch Petroleum Shell. So this man became very, very wealthy, and he was highly regarded in America as well as in England and Mexico for his work as a civil engineer and the things that that he had done in his lifetime. So the body of his work, using body, even though it's his name, but he was an accomplished man, and one of very respected. So I could understand why he would go back to England and realize that it's not worth to deal with the espionage and the things that were going on, having to sneak into the country every time he wanted to come up to Shasta to go into the tunnel. Right.
Did you actually find out during your investigations whether he still had family over here? I mean, did you track his...
Well, in his memoirs that I have here in front of me, he married in 1898 Mary Hammer, I guess Hamer, and they had one daughter, and the daughter would be the one who survived him, which I would need some help from people listening to this broadcast to see if they want to further this interesting story, the legend of J.C. Brown. But her name is Patrice Millicent Kelton. That's Kelton, and she was the daughter of Mary and John Benjamin Body. And so he passed in 1940. So I would say the daughter must have had children. She must have remarried, but the name we'd be looking for is Patrice Millicent Kelton, who was a descendant from John and Mary Body.
How do you spell that surname again?
Well, the surname would be Beatrice, Beatrice, Millicent, Millicent. Last name is Kelton, Kelton, and she would be the daughter of John and Mary Body, Body.
Right, okay. So beyond that, you haven't yet any clue as to whether there are any living relatives?
No, I haven't. I have not got around to researching that aspect of it yet, but I was talking to a number of people, and that's kind of the route that I'll be going now. The fact that I'm here in the U.S. makes it a little difficult to get the genealogy records or the records in the U.K. So I've got to do some more extensive research, and that's why I'm reaching out to your listenership, because I know there's probably somebody there listening who has easy access to finding out, the information that I'm seeking.
Right. Did you actually find out which part of England he lived in?
Yes, he was born in Cornwall, England.
Oh, right, yes.
And as I said, the office was in London for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company, which is still there now under a different name. They're now a publishing house right now, so a very large publishing house. He ended up having a mansion, I guess, living in Scotland, so there is... in his later years, he and his wife lived in Scotland, so he must have had a castle at some point. I can tell you he was born in 1867, and he died in 1938, or 1940 actually, May 23rd of 1940. And he went to school in, the city of London is where he did his schooling. And so he was a very astute gentleman there. Let's see. His professor was Harry Adams. So he went to the City of London College, studied under Professor Harry Adams. And as I said, he spent from 1890 to 1940 working for Sir Wheatman Pearson and Sons Limited, or the Lord Cowdray Mining Company, for the dominant part of his life. And as I said, for 25 years, he executed the work for that company in Mexico. And so, I mean, he was definitely an accomplished civil engineer. Matter of fact, there were records I found of him in the American Society of Civil Engineers and his memoirs. So, very accomplished civil engineer. And as I said, initially when I started the research, I said, well, I've got to find a man who's worth, millions of dollars, and who's got to be in his late 60s or older to match this legend. But lo and behold, there was a man who was worth, a multimillionaire, and who was in his late 60s that I found, and who was British and did work for the Lord Cowdray Mining Company. So if it walks like a duck, Michael, and it quacks like a duck, it's probably a duck. Now, thereafter, after discovering this on paper, I had to come out to the west coast of California to actually find, where I believe the actual back entrance to this Lemurian civilization was located. And fortunately, I had a map, and the map was of the Mount Shasta Springs Resort that I believe that in the early 1900s that Lord Cowdray and J.B. Body were frequenting when they came across this unusual basalt rock formation.
Right. Do you think that he actually took Lord Cowdray to the caves?
Yes.
Yes. I mean, it would seem odd if he didn't. So you have another family who must have, or possibly has, some information about it.
Well, the other family would be Sir Wheatman Pearson. Sir Wheatman Dickinson Pearson's heirs would be very much aware of what his lieutenant, right-hand man, John Benjamin Body, and him had found in the early 1900s, because they kept this, obviously closely guarded secret, but I'm sure they let family members know about this amazing find that they had found, in the early 1900s. So how could they not?
Yeah, I agree. Now, did you mention something that they found in the caves that I haven't read about? Did you say there was an object that looked like a sun?
Yes, they found golden streamers that looked like the sun with, as I said, radium and copper that were combined to make these objects that, in that day and age, we didn't have the technology to make that. So
No.
John Benjamin Body found some things that we, in the year 1904 and 1907, did not have the capabilities of manufacturing, because he was a geologist and
Right.
involved on major projects throughout the world. So here's a man who knows construction. That's what he was schooled in. I mean, what better authority can you have that someone who's a civil engineer could say, we don't have this capability today?
Oh, yeah. Well, I'll tell you what came into my mind when you mentioned the sun with streamers. I immediately thought of that Egyptian wall painting or carving, whatever you call it, in Akhenaten's time, where you had the sun and all these streamers coming down from it. I mean, you obviously don't know what it looked like. Presumably that is all you can tell us about it.
Right. Well, I could only tell you what I read in the
Yes.
in the 1934 newspaper article. Because I said initially, I didn't have that article until Michael Fitzgerald of the Stockton Record, after interviewing me in February of last year of 2008, was kind enough
Right.
to send me the actual article that was in the paper.
Yes.
And so what I did is I took the time to type it all out longhand, so that way I could read it. But basically, he found the spears that I mentioned, and he found the 27 skeletons, which I've already mentioned there, and the village. That's unbelievable to find a village. And he believed that
Yes.
there were people that had left things haphazardly, as though they must have heard him and his party coming. The streamers were from the sun, were worked in gold stringers. There were 13, I believe, 13 statues made of gold and copper. That's the end of his quote. And he goes on to say, and this is John Benjamin Body, or J.C. Brown, what he told the newspaper of 1934, and this is what he claimed. He said, these are his words, "I believe this race of people forms an important link in ancient American history. They were highly skilled craftsmen, as their work shows. Because there was a glow to three of these statues, I believe they were used radium, and they were tempered with copper." So, and here's a man then he goes on to end by saying, "Have you ever read or studied anything about the lost continent of Lemuria?" And he's talking now to the newspaper columnist of the Stockton Record in '34, and he goes on to say, "Scientists claim it is the connecting link in the story of civilization. I believe here is the key to that lost civilization." So it's his belief that Lemuria did exist. He found ancient remnants of it, and he was willing in 1934 to take up a party of 80 people to go up for an expedition. But I believe he was scared off, and the fact that he had been, nearly killed once before, as he mentioned to the group, that he was very mindful of, is it really worth it? And then if you think about it, Michael, gold fever, the gold rush. I mean, there are many people who found gold, and as soon as people know where their claim was, whatever, they no longer existed. So his probably biggest fear was, too, once I show these people where this is, will my days be numbered as well? Because when greed sets in, a lot of, bad things can happen. So here's a man who's already a made man, so to speak. He doesn't need the money. And, here he is at this time in 34. He's a grandfather. He's an older man, and he's probably realizing, what? This is one secret that may have to be kept secret, because there's an American government, or there's a British contingency as well that want to keep the colonization going, because if you can't con people, Michael, you can't control them.
I believe entirely. I have to think, Stephen, that perhaps in those 30 years that he may well have photographed a lot of the artifacts, so perhaps somewhere, perhaps in this bank vault, there may be more than one could imagine.
Well, what I'm about to do is I'm going to trek my way down to at some point before the end of the year or find out the bank that I believe in, the Laredo National Bank, that does still exist on San Bernardino Avenue, if there are any records, which I don't know if there are, with John Benjamin Body or J.C. Brown having an account there. And there would be, one of the clues. And the other clues would have to be in England or in Scotland with the family members as to what he brought back to the UK, because he had made, in his 40 years or so, they come back and forth to the United States.
Yeah.
I count at least 40 border crossings, but 13 through Mexico. So, he's traveled many, many times in ocean liners coming, from England to the United States. So it would take a wealthy man to come over that many times in his lifetime. So, everything that I see here with John Benjamin Body lets me know that, we have definitely a story that needs to be solved completely, and I'm hoping that there are people there that are listeners, that someone can pick up the ball and run with it on your side of the ocean.
Yes.
And find some of these clues that I've neatly laid out for you, because I'm like the messenger. I'm like the umpire or in a soccer game. I'm calling it like I see it, and when the dust clears or the dust settles, you look on the Jumbotron scene, and the umpires usually got the call right. So I believe I've made the right call, Michael, and I just believe that the truth lies somewhere in what I've said, and that it needs to get out there, because we as a people need to know where we've been, because if we don't know where we've been, how in the world can we chart where we're going?
Indeed, yes. I can recall reading not too long ago another discovery in caves in the States. Can't think where it was, where they also found these exceptionally tall skeletons. Now, in your researching of Lemuria, have you found other evidence to support what J.B. Body found?
Yes, recently I came across a story. And I put up a YouTube video called "The Calaveras Skulls Revealed." But in 1865, I believe, there was some evidence found in a mine in Calaveras County, California. And Michael Cremo also makes mention of it as well, to an unearthed skull that was at least 50 million years old, of indigenous or Native American origin. And the gentleman, whose name is Josiah D. Whitney, who was the archaeologist, he was the chief surveyor for California. And he and his professors of Harvard all agreed that it was the greatest find ever in North America, and then the man was discredited. But there is visible proof that, Native man has been here, for over 50 million years in North America. There was another man, Dr. Stanley Lee, who is an archaeologist for the Museum of Toronto, I believe, found a find in 1951 that he believed was 32 to 50,000 years old, that unearthed 4 primitive peoples, 3 of which were Native American, Sioux, Salish, and Algonquin, and the 4th he called the Bearded White Man. And he said that they were up in Ontario, in Shagwindal, Ontario, where he found this find. And he said that they then, after the Ice Age, which he claimed was about a lot longer than it was claimed, about 30 to 50,000 years ago, the Bearded White Man went east towards Scandinavia and Europe, and then the Salish came down to the Pacific Northwest, the Sioux came down to the Plain States, and then the Algonquin came down to the Great Lakes, and that's how the Native Americans came down to North America. But the 4th group, who was the Bearded White Man, was interesting, couldn't exist with the 3 red men, so to speak, and then went on to Europe or Scandinavia, and I believe they are responsible for the annihilation of the Cro-Magnon man. And
right.
It's just interesting that you see today the killing machine still exists. So you just wonder, what have we learned in 50,000 years, so to speak,
Yes. I've also read of there being caves in the Grand Canyon, although I think they've been attributed to both the Atlanteans and the Lemurians. Well, again, if I recall correctly, they found skeletons similar to what you've described.
Yes, and what I've learned since coming out here, that the civilization on the Mount Shasta is much older than Lemurian, much older.
Right.
Predates Lemurian.
It ran for quite many thousands of years, doesn't it? As far as one can tell.
It is 1 million years old, from what I've learned recently.
Is it?
The civilization. Yeah. So it's a lot older. The last technological advanced civilization, which was the Lemurian and Atlantean, were the last remnants that went in. But the cave systems, the underground world that J.C. Brown had claimed to have found, was the last civilization that went underground, but they've been under there 1 million years.
Because
there
I
were caves
recall
throughout the world.
Yeah. Sorry, carry on, Stephen.
No, there were caves throughout the world that's found. If you look at Vedic teaching, India's oral history of the beginning of the world, I mean, there are many interesting tidbits that you'll find there. That our Earth is millions of years old, and it's been inhabited for over 300 million years by man. Man has walked with dinosaur. Man has survived dinosaur and still lives on this Earth. And we've been around a long time. If you look in our own solar system, you've got an asteroid belt, Michael, that could be the remnants of a war with nuclear weapons that exploded a planet.
Yes.
So, I mean, I'm putting it out there for the simple reason that, the mind is like a parachute. It can only work if it's open.
Yeah. Well, it has in fact been said that the asteroid belt was the remains of a planet that is generally called Maldek, and it was destroyed in the manner that you've mentioned.
Well, as I said, I've done quite a bit of research on this, and it's interesting, the findings that I've come up with. But the more research I do, the more I realize that I'm on the right path, and there are a lot of knowledgeable people, more so than I, that'll come forward to me. I've been privy to speaking with a lot of Native Americans and people who are in the know, who now are approaching me and say, yeah, you know what, the things that you've discussed, let me tell you about this or that and the other thing. So I've been fortunate enough to have some validation along the way coming from the East Coast to the West Coast now, which I believe is the West Coast was the remains of the lost continent of Lemuria.
So what is your position now? Where do you sort of stand on the whole matter?
Well, I sort of stand that the truth will be revealed very shortly, and that there are many things now that will be coming to light. I mean, we're coming to the age of Aquarius. The Hopi Indians claim that a lot of things will come to light in 2012. So we're coming to an age of enlightenment. I think a lot of people are coming into the realization that they're knowing that some of these things that I mentioned will be coming to light. And if there is an ancient civilization that does exist there and has existed and has flourished, they're waiting for the right time to appear.
I totally believe you, and I'm also convinced that 2012 is significant in our evolution. But there is a lot of talk, actually, of the Lemurians still living inside the Earth.
Well, you have a good point there. I just finished doing an excerpt, which I'm putting up right now up on YouTube. I do a program here in Mount Shasta at the college. It's on mctv15.org, and does tell us really exists. And there are many channelers who believe that it does, and they make mention of the city, the structure of the city, the underground network. And these stories have all over the world, all different cultures share these same viewpoints and stories. So I meet many people on the mountain of Mount Shasta. I spend some time on the mountain now because I'm here in Mount Shasta right now. And I got here in April, and I'm still here in late September, and with no signs of when I'm leaving doing a show here. But I learned that people come here from all over the world because there is a belief that this is the cradle of civilization, and I believe, and I now hold that same belief, Michael.
Yeah. I've certainly heard many times that people believe there is a very special portal there.
Well, I believe that there is. As I said, I've now been privileged to be around people that are very spiritual and enlightened beings that come here, and I'm starting to see firsthand evidence of what the Lemurian mindset is and what they want for us to do to elevate, to go from the third to the fifth dimension.
Yes.
And I've been with some channelers, people who pretty much are in tune with that. And what I've learned about, there is a civilization there under Mount Shasta. And they're waiting for the time is right. There are people who go in etherically into the mountain and not in the 3D. And I did find a back entrance, as I mentioned, I found J.C. Brown or J.B. Body's entrance, which lied 11 miles exactly, to the distance of where he claimed it was, that led underneath Mount Shasta. So I have no doubt that there is a physical entrance. It's been sealed up now, so you cannot get access to it. It's on a private property, so I will respect that, and I will just let that stay for this particular time. But I do believe that when the time is right, that a great thinker will appear, so to speak, and they will let us know that, we're not alone, we've been here. But it's interesting, if you look into the UFO topic, and many of the mountain ranges, a lot of activity has been seen above the mountains. People have seen craft going into the mountains. I myself have seen things in Mount Adams. I've seen things here in Mount Shasta that defy conventional, technology that we have here on this planet. So I have no doubt that, there is an inner earth and that there are people that have been here. Even in the Bible, it talks about, things about, the Garden of Eden and where it might exist. And the Garden of Eden is probably in the inner earth, in the city near Shambhala, and all the things that we've just thought was myth or legend may very well be fact, Michael.
Yes. Now, Stephen, it's been terrifically interesting and the time's flying by. I would like you to give our listeners your website address and email address if you're prepared to take inquiries or questions from people.
Yes, we'll start with my email address. My email address is screenwriter2012 at gmail.com. That's screenwriter2012 at gmail.com. And my website, for those who want to learn more about the legend of J.C. Brown, it's my name, Stephen, S-T-E-P-H-E-N, Sindoni, S-I-N-D-O-N-I, webs, W-E-B-S.com. So that's StephenSindoni.webs.com. And I also have a site on YouTube. It's youtube.com, /Sindoni Revealed 53. My last name, it'll be Sindoni Revealed 53, where I have probably about 100 different videos. I've got a number of other interviews, interesting like yours here today on my YouTube site. I've been on Coast to Coast AM and a number of others on your station, BBS Radio. And I want to thank BBS and you, Michael, for allowing me to continue getting the message out on BBS. Your producer, director, and everybody involved with your station has been a blessing for me, and I thank you immensely today.
You're welcome. It's wonderful to have you on the program. I think it might be wise to repeat that YouTube address because that's obviously going to be of interest.
Okay, it's youtube.com, the /, and then it's S-I-N, D as in David, O-N-I, R-E-V-E-A-L-E-D, revealed, and 50, the number 53. So that's Sindoni Revealed 53. But that's at YouTube.
Okay.
If you simply took my name, Stephen Sindoni, and Googled it under videos, there's probably about 500 videos or 600 videos, I lost count, attached to my name.
Really? Oh, my goodness, that's wonderful. Well, it's really been extremely interesting. I'm sure you could have spoken longer, but we certainly covered the main thrust of your adventures, I call them, and who knows where it might yet lead. I think your email address is very useful, just in case. You never know who's listening in and might be able to help you in your research in England or Scotland, so you never know what comes up. So it sounds to me as though you're being guided, Stephen, and you've been inspired, I think, to find the cave again, so who knows what will happen.
Well, I've been told that, I was the one who was supposed to bring this forward, and so I'm doing the missionary work, and I'm doing what I was told I needed to do, and I'm going to stay on this as long as I can, because I realize that life changes when we do, and for a planet that's been around 300 million years, it's time that we love one another, and we realize that we are all connected on this planet and others, and that to believe that we are the only civilized life in the universe is utterly absurd.
I think that's a fantastic way to end the program. Thank you very much for coming on to it. I've got about a minute left, I think, to tell our listeners who is on next week, and that will be Catherine Richardson, who is a galactic guide to spiritual expansion, and she's written a book called The Starfleet Messages, which we will obviously discuss in the program, so I'm looking forward to that one. So thank you very much for being with me today, and I do hope you can be with me next week. God bless you all. Thank you.